She was the most photographed woman in the world. And yet, on the night she died, not a single person who was supposed to protect her was there. The investigation closed. The verdict was recorded. The case was officially explained. But the question that has stayed with millions of people for nearly 30 years is not how she died. It is why, given everything that came before, that night was almost inevitable. This is not a story about conspiracy. There is none to tell. This is a story about what happens when a human being is turned into a symbol, and what that cost her. The events you are about to see are based on historical fact. This documentary combines archival footage from verified sources with AI-generated imagery for educational illustration. All sources are listed in the description. People who were close to Diana in those early months described the same thing. A woman trying very hard to learn a role that no one had properly explained to her. She had been a kindergarten assistant. She liked pop music. She had never given a formal speech in her life. And suddenly, she was expected to stand beside heads of state, attend banquets with precise protocols, and above all else, smile. Always smile. She was someone who felt things openly, who needed connection, who, by every account, wanted to be known, not studied from a distance. That tension between the image and the woman would define everything that followed. July 29th, 1981. A 20-year-old woman walks down the aisle of St. Paul's Cathedral in a dress with a 25-foot train. 2.5 billion people are watching. She is young. She is radiant. She is, according to every newspaper in Britain, exactly what the monarchy needed. But here is the detail history tends to skip over. No one asked her if she was ready. Most people know the marriage failed. What is less understood is how quickly and how privately it began to fall apart. Within months of the wedding, the emotional gap between Charles and Diana was evident to everyone close to them. He had been shaped by decades of royal training. Duty before feeling, composure before truth. Carry on. She was someone who needed things to be acknowledged, named, felt. The institution had a mechanism for this kind of friction. It was called silence. Diana could not do that. And the people around her, rather than acknowledging the difficulty, largely expected her to learn. By the mid-1980s, both were involved elsewhere. Both knew it. Both, by every account, were unhappy. But the world was only seeing the photographs. And the photographs showed something the palace had carefully arranged. Two people, side by side, representing the future of the British monarchy. What they did not show was Diana, alone in the evenings, calling friends and asking a question that appears again and again in the accounts of people who knew her. She asked whether she was losing her mind. She was not, but she had been told repeatedly that her feelings were excessive, that she was too sensitive, too emotional, too difficult. She had been made to feel that the problem was her. December 9th, 1992. The Prime Minister stood in the House of Commons and announced that the Prince and Princess of Wales had formally separated. For the first time, something that had been a private tragedy became a public crisis. The monarchy did not just have a difficult marriage on its hands. It had a problem it could not solve by staying quiet. Because Diana had not just stopped being quiet. She had already started talking to someone. And what she told them would eventually be watched by more people than the wedding itself. For 3 years after the separation, Diana gave no interviews. She attended engagements. She raised her sons. She said nothing publicly about her marriage. And then, in the summer of 1995, she agreed to meet a journalist from the BBC. What she did not know, and what the BBC would not admit for 26 years, was how that meeting had actually been arranged. November 1995. 23 million people in Britain turned on their televisions. What they saw, no member of the royal family had ever done in public before. Diana sat in front of a camera and spoke about the marriage, about the loneliness, about her own struggles with her mental health, about what she had needed and what she had never been given. And then, in a single sentence that stopped the room, there were 3 of us in this marriage. So it was a bit crowded. It was not a surprise to most people watching. The rumors had circulated for years, but she said it herself, in her own words, looking directly at the camera. That was new. The palace's response was immediate. The Queen wrote privately, urging an early divorce. The institution had decided this could not continue. But here is what almost no documentary mentions. That interview, the most powerful moment Diana ever had on her own terms, had been obtained through deception. A BBC journalist had used fabricated bank documents to convince Diana's aide that she was being spied on by the palace. The forgeries created a climate of paranoia that made Diana more willing to speak. In 2021, the Dyson Inquiry confirmed the BBC had known this and covered it up for decades. So even in the moment Diana finally controlled her own story, the ground beneath it had been manipulated by someone else. Before we continue, I want to ask you something. Do you think the people around Diana, the institution, the press, and the public could have acted differently? Or was the outcome always going to be what it was? Leave your answer below. I read everyone. August 1996. The divorce was finalized. Diana lost her HRH title, her formal protection, her standing as a working royal. In the language of the palace, she was now a private citizen. The world did not treat her like one. If anything, the attention grew more intense. And here is the part of Diana's story that refuses to resolve cleanly. Her relationship with the press was never simply one of persecution. She used it. She cultivated journalists. She was, at times, the source of the very stories that shaped her image. But there is a significant difference between managing the press on your own terms and being followed through a foreign city at midnight by strangers on motorcycles. One is strategy. The other is something closer to captivity. In these last years, Diana did something that genuinely surprised the people who had tried to manage her. She became harder to ignore. She walked through active minefields in Angola, while world leaders were still debating whether landmines were even worth discussing. She sat with AIDS patients at a time when that still required a kind of courage most public figures did not have. She flew to Bosnia to speak with survivors of a war that had officially ended, but had not really. She used the visibility that had once suffocated her and turned it into leverage for people who had none. She was 36 years old. She had no institutional backing, no royal budget, no security staff provided by the palace. She was more autonomous than she had ever been in her adult life, and she was entirely unprotected. August 31st, 1997. Paris. The official findings are not in dispute. Two major investigations, one French and one British, reached the same conclusion. The car was traveling at high speed through the Pont de l'Alma tunnel. The driver, Henri Paul, had a blood alcohol level more than 3 times the legal limit. Diana and Dodi Fayed were not wearing seatbelts. And in the moments before the crash, multiple vehicles, paparazzi, were in pursuit. The British inquest jury, in 2008, returned a verdict of unlawful killing. Not murder. Unlawful killing. Grossly negligent driving, made significantly worse by the pursuing vehicles. No conspiracy was found. No credible evidence of orchestrated harm was produced, despite an investigation that lasted nearly 4 years. But the detail recorded in the investigation, and almost never discussed, is what happened in the 90 minutes before the car entered that tunnel. Diana and her party had left the Ritz Hotel through a rear entrance, specifically to avoid the photographers waiting at the front. The plan had been arranged by Dodi's security team, without following standard protocols. The driver, Henri Paul, was not Diana's usual driver. He had been called in at the last minute, and the decision to leave when they did, the way they did, through the exit they chose, was made under the direct pressure of photographers surrounding the hotel. Every one of those decisions was shaped by the presence of cameras. That is what the investigation found. That is what the inquest recorded. And yet, here is the question no investigation can answer. If 16 years of relentless pursuit had not built that particular kind of pressure, the panic, the improvisation, the desperate need to escape, would those same decisions have been made? The files documented the cause. They could not document the accumulated weight of everything that came before it. In the days after Diana's death, something happened that the royal household was entirely unprepared for. Flowers arrived at Kensington Palace in the millions. People queued for hours, some through the night, to sign books of condolence. The grief was not performative. Or rather, it was the kind of grief that can only emerge when something people have felt privately is finally given permission to exist in public. The royal family, in those initial days, remained in Scotland. The protocols were followed. The flag above Buckingham Palace did not fly at half-mast. The institution behaved as it had been trained to behave, with silence. The public had been watching that institution use silence against Diana for 15 years. They recognized it. The Queen eventually addressed the nation. The flag was eventually lowered. Charles brought the boys back to London. But there is a particular kind of damage that comes from being too late, and it is very difficult to undo. The monarchy's relationship with the British public was altered by those 5 days, permanently. So, the story has been explained. The investigation is closed. The verdict is recorded. The case is officially resolved. And the reason it still does not feel that way, the reason you are watching this, the reason these stories keep being told, is not because facts are missing. It is because the emotional accounting was never completed. Diana entered public life as a symbol the monarchy needed. She left it 16 years later, stripped of her title and her formal protection, still being chased through a tunnel in the middle of the night. What official investigations can establish is cause. What they cannot establish is meaning. And meaning, the question of what we owe the people we turn into symbols, is not something any inquest jury can answer. The documentation is complete. The grief for many people is not. Perhaps that is what we are really asking every time we return to this story. Not what happened in that tunnel, but whether somewhere along the way it could have been different. Whether anyone with the power to protect her chose to use it. The files are closed. The question is not. Before you go, one question. Not about what happened, about what you believe. Do you think the people who shaped Diana's life understood the cost of what they were doing? Or do you think they simply never stopped to ask? Write your answer below. These are the comments I read most carefully. And if you want to keep exploring stories like this, histories where the official explanation is complete, but the human truth is still being untangled, this channel is where those conversations happen. Subscribe if that is the kind of story you want to follow.